Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to our random review. Today's random review is from 1980, and it's The Hunter, Steve McQueen's last film before he died at the way too early age of 50. This is a strange film. It was co-written by Peter Hyams, who probably should have directed it. He would go on to make the wonderful Outland with Sean Connery the year after. It was directed by Buzz Kulik, which apparently is actually a real person's name, who's probably more famous for the TV movie Brian Song with James Caan and Billy D. Williams about the Chicago Bears running back Brian Piccolo and his early death as well. This is an imprint Blu-ray. It's by number 110. This has a commentary by historian Jason Ney from 2022 and Steve McQueen, Man on the Edge, a vintage documentary narrated by James Coburn, who's obviously of the same generation as Steve McQueen. This is a film, perhaps because I had two writers, I'm not quite sure, but it's seriously schizophrenic. It also stars the really underrated Catherine Harold, Eli Wallach, Ben Johnson makes a wonderful cameo. LeVar Burton, who is more famous for being in Star Trek. He appears in the film obviously without his visor. And it's a film based on the true story of a modern day bounty hunter whose nickname is Papa, which is kind of ironic because his girlfriend, played by Catherine Harold, is pregnant and he's not really that keen on being a papa. He's happier kind of tinkering with old toys because he doesn't like new things. So one of the problems of the film is, as I say, it's schizophrenic. So it's part almost a knockabout comedy. Apparently there's two different scores for the film as well, and some of either score almost appears on, depending on what cut of the film or what version, the US version or the international version. The score at times is really quite bad because again it plays it for broad comedy, and McQueen is essentially almost sending up his cool persona to some extent the way De Niro sent it up and Analyze This and other comedies that he's been in, or comedies that he's been in that kind of undermine his more famous kind of gangster image. McQueen undermines it, as well as the ongoing joke that's made probably about 10 times during the film about he's not that good a driver. You know, obviously the car chase in Bullet is iconic. There is, you know, a couple of car chases in here, or a car and a combine harvester chase. But again, the running joke is that Steve McQueen's not very good at driving. I mean, the first scene after the credit sequence, or during the credit sequence, he tries to parallel park unsuccessfully and bashing the cars round about him. On one of his jobs to Nebraska to track down these two twins. Yeah, two twins, strangely enough. He gets a rental Trans Am, and of course he can't control it. He struggles to put it into drive instead of reverse, and that's the kind of running joke that here's cool Steve McQueen, but this character can't really drive very well. Whether the real life character couldn't drive very well, I'm not quite sure. Again, I haven't listened to the commentary yet, so I can't actually comment on that. But the film spends half the time undermining or having a little giggle at Steve McQueen's kind of on-screen cool persona. Obviously, Steve McQueen pretty much came from nothing and always was kind of paranoid about his fame. I've never really been a huge Steve McQueen fan. Obviously, he had a magnetic presence and a star presence, but as far as an actor, I was never really that impressed with him. He's fine in this, but again, it is a bit strange as it undercuts most of his career. The tone sometimes is actually a little bit like Midnight Run. Eli Wallach kind of pops in and out as a character who gives him jobs to track down these absconded criminals. As I say, Ben Johnson gives a nice cameo as a local sheriff who threatens Steve McQueen at gunpoint to not take his nephew away. But the other part of the film has scenes of like cop suicide. There's a cop who overlooks this house that's got a swimming pool and tennis courts, and he knows that this guy does drugs. And out of frustration, the cop took some drugs and sold them, and then now the authorities are after him. So you have this stuff about suicide. There's like a scene where Steve McQueen tells his girlfriend that they should have had an abortion. So the stuff about abortions. And all throughout this, we have Tracy Walker, who again will probably be not a name you recognise, but certainly a face in cult cinema. And he plays this drug-addled psychopath who phones up Steve McQueen and says he's going to kill him, and threatens Catherine Harold when she's at school, because she's a teacher, in a fairly odd and harrowing scene. So in between McQueen doing all these pratfalls and not being able to drive very well and driving into cars and annoying people, not being the world's most efficient bounty hunter, you have stuff about suicide and abortion and a drug-addled psychopath threatening his pregnant girlfriend. So there's like, the film is fighting against itself, very much like Robert Mitchum's Two Hands in Night of the Hunter, to actually see who's going to come out on top. The kind of gritty, dark, realistic look of life at the end of the 70s, or this kind of light-hearted knockabout, kind of self-effacing, self-parodic performance by Steve McQueen. It's a film that's almost built on sand. It kind of shifts and moves and doesn't really know what to be at. I mean, there's extended scenes of McQueen on the job. There's one where there's a fairly gun-happy young man, which leads to a huge car chase. Not a car chase, it leads to a huge chase, which ends up being a kidnap situation on a subway or an L train, where McQueen, and obviously a stuntman, is hanging off the L train, which leads to a not very fast car chase up a car park, a multi-storey. And again, I'm not sure in 1980 how common those multi-stories were in cities, which leads to a rather bizarre end of the chase. So it's like, yeah, we'll forget about the drug-induced psychopath who's threatening his life, and we'll just go on an episodic chase for a little while, and then we'll get back to the drug-addled psychopath. Apart from anything else, the film looks like a TV film. It looks almost like an episode of the Rockford Files. It's very flat. The credits are very much like television credits. Obviously Buzz Kulik did some TV movies. But the film was released in theatres, I do believe. The budget was $8 million, which in 1980, I suppose, was still a tidy sum. It did make allegedly 16 million, so it's fairly successful. McQueen, during the shoot, kind of knew he was a bit ill, and he does look tired. But again, a lot of that is his character is tired and getting too old for this shit, as Danny Glover might say some years later. But again, it's a very strange film as far as tone, and it is one of those classic films where you can tell there's perhaps two halves of a script and it should have went one way or the other. But there's still lots to enjoy. I know this review might come across as being a bit negative, but it's not really. It's just a bit muddled. The print looks really good. Again, the archive documentary again is of its time, but fairly interesting. And again, apologies for not having listened to the commentary yet, but I certainly will the next time, as far as the background, because maybe it will go into more detail about the script and why it does seem to be a film that's fighting against itself or struggling to decide what it wants to be. Again, co-written by Peter Hyams, and you do get the sense it would be better if Peter Hyams had actually directed it. I mean, at times McQueen does show his softer side towards Harold, but again, then he's really insensitive towards her. But it is kind of explained, there's a reason for that at the time. And again, there is actually something quite moving that caught me by surprise at the end of the film, when, spoiler alert, Catherine Harold does have the baby, and McQueen's holding it, and then the film pretty much ends. There is something strangely moving about that, knowing that it was McQueen's last film. So that's The Hunter from 1980, even though it feels like a 70s film, but very much like the 70s into the 80s, people were a bit confused as to what the future might hold, and the film itself is a bit confused, but certainly worth a look. And obviously if you're a Steve McQueen fan, there's a couple of impressive stunts, not perhaps performed by Steve McQueen, perhaps somebody looking very much like Steve McQueen, and there is a nice combine harvester car chase. So that's The Hunter. Please let me know in the comments below if you've seen The Hunter and what you think of it, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.